Alrighty YouTubians, welcome back to BT Adventures. This is a video you're not going to want to miss. In today's video we're going to address something not talked about by most other channels when it comes to survival, and that is the pyramid of survival and how the will to live and knowledge and kit ties into one another, and how applying each one and a fundamental understanding will help you in any situation. So this video is for those who have the cognitive comprehension to understand what's going on in the world today. Whether it's religion, whether it's wars, or maybe you know your history. So this video is not going to be your typical ASMR, no talking. This is going to be a wealth of knowledge coming at you hard today. So grab your pen, grab your paper, get ready to take notes, because in this video there might be some things you either don't know, overlooked, in which could critically help your ability to thrive in an upcoming scenario. So, without further ado, let's roll the montage. So before we get to our topic of conversation for this video, we're going to get our fire started. I'm not going to talk too much about fires today, though I will say this. When you're dealing with autumn and winter weather, the ground's wet or frozen, it is vital that you build your fire off the ground. I am using dry firewood. I'm not going to go out and make this a proper survival video and showing you guys how to harvest wet wood, how to start a fire in wet conditions. I don't have the battery power for my camera today to film that as well as what I want to incorporate. So today we're going to use dry wood, show you a technique how to get it going in wet weather, and we'll go from there. So when building a fire in wet conditions, like I said, you want to have it off the ground. You can do that using the method as a log cabin. You build up and then you burn down, giving your fire enough time to create the coals it needs in these damp, wet conditions. The trick to doing fires in wet conditions is you need like at least 3 times more kindling than you would do in a dry fire. So when it's wet and cold, a lot more kindling is required to get those small pieces burning to where the fire can be sufficient enough to keep itself ignited. I have found the most successful way in any condition to light a fire is using Vaseline and cotton wool. Now you might think, oh, well, if it's a survival situation, how long is it before you run out of these? So the trick to that is every time you use a resource you brought in, cotton like this, cotton wool and Vaseline, I am in the same sense going to replace that by using a natural tinder in my area, cattail, cedar bark or fat wood, and if those are damp I am going to dry those and replenish my resources as I burn at the same time. That way I'm not going to be in a situation in which I run out of an important item to start my fires with. Okay, so let's get into depth with this. The will to live means never giving up in any situation. You can have the most expensive kit, you can have a $6,000 bag on your back. If you don't have the knowledge behind that bag, how to use it, how to have items work efficiently and for multiple purposes, without the will to live. So without the will to live, you can still perish regardless of what you have for kit. Adversity is forged through discipline. That means you have to be practicing, you have to get out here, you have to apply the skills. The will to live is something that everyone has, that survival instinct that will kick on when they least expect it. Adversity, through discipline, through beating on yourself, doing the things you don't want to do. Because if you've had a very sedimentary, easy life and you expect to go out into the bush in a survival situation, when it's raining, when it's freezing cold, you have to go hunt, you have to gather, you have to always have a supply of firewood going. There's times when you do not want to do it, when your body will not feel like doing it. But the will to live, you have to get through any situation despite the outcome. So let's talk about survival. Most survival situations occur from plain ignorance or arrogance or an overconfident belief in one's own ability and self, or simply because the forces of nature have been simply overlooked. For instance, there's forest fires, there's tsunamis, there's hurricanes, there's forces of nature in which we cannot prevent, and you get put into a survival situation. But those are what I call short term. In other words, you're just relocating, you're finding help, you're moving on. But still, you should always be prepared to be able to have what you need on at hand, whether it's for a short term or long term. So in this video, we're not talking about short term survival situations, such as you're driving on a road trip and your car breaks down in the middle of nowhere. If you don't have the tools required, if you don't have a spare tire, though there's sometimes parts can fault and there's nothing you can do about it, but at least if you are prepared, having tools, a spare tire, whether it's a winch, a tow strap, you are helping and aiding yourself in that situation. That is avoiding the arrogance and the ignorance of the factor of, I'm going to go out and nothing's going to happen to me. That's when things go wrong. Same with people going on day hikes. They don't bring water. They don't think about, oh, what happens if I roll an ankle? Do I have the basic first aid knowledge or know how to make a splint in the mountains, in the bush, in order to get help and get out of that situation? No. People nowadays simply rely on, oh, I got my GPS, a Garmin, someone's here to come save me, I am okay. Ignorance and arrogance at its finest. So understanding your environment will allow you to bring the best equipment and adopt the best techniques you need and to learn the correct skills, which takes us into knowledge. So knowledge, the more you know, the easier it is to survive. Knowledge dispels fear. If you know, you can go out and you can gather what you need, how to hunt, you can read the land, how to build a shelter, how to work with wood. That knowledge eliminates the panic of fear. So the 6 P's, prior planning and preparation prevents poor performance. Understand it? So by knowledge and understanding, we learn that in a lot of these videos you say, survival, 3 days. That's not a survival situation. It's basically glorified camping, regardless of what anyone says. Whether when you're -30, you're in a downpouring rain, you are not in a survival situation. In a survival situation, there is fear and anxiety will set in. You have pain, you have injury, you have illness to prevent. You have to deal with the cold temperatures as well as the hot temperatures. You have thirst, you have hunger, you have fatigue. There is sleep deprivation, boredom, loneliness and isolation. All factors which do not play into a 3-day survival video because it is in a controlled situation, and anytime you can deploy, you can get out there, you can go home. So do not be fooled by what you see on these videos as everyone handling it so calmly. Self-confidence is the product of good training, getting out into the bush, learning these skills, testing your gear. That is absolutely crucial. You do not want to end up in a survival situation without testing your gear, knowing how well it handles. So self-confidence is the product of good training and sound knowledge. Physical fitness plays a huge importance. Your mental state and your physical state are intertwined. If you have a weak body, you will have a weak mind. Despite what you think about it or what people say, it's the reason why the forces train so hard. Look at the gladiators, look at the Romans, look throughout history. The fighters, the warriors were hardened men, hardened bodies. Does not mean you have to be aesthetic. It means you have to be functional for your purpose. Your rate of exhaustion, how well you get fatigued, is your body used to working hard in scenarios as well as you can take it easy. Without training, it will make your situation harder. We must adapt and overcome. Some more about knowledge. For instance, to understand your location in a survival situation, whether it's short-term or long-term, are you fleeing because of a threat? Is it a natural disaster? Like I said, those with the cognitive comprehension to understand history, religion, and what's going on in the world. Financially, with the fiat currencies, world economics, is a lot going on right now, and history repeats itself. So for whatever your reason, whether you're put into any type of survival situation, you must understand where are you going, what is your location. To pick the right location, there's certain factors you must know. What are you building? Okay, are you going to build a long-term hut or a short-term hut? This is what I would consider a short-term 3-season cabin shelter. It's built with 2 beds raised off the ground, because where I am is a really damp, wet climate. I do not want to be on the ground. I do not want to end up with a wet sleeping bag. I do not want to end up with wet gear. So I know I have beds must be risen off the ground. With that being said, to what you are building, you see a lot of these cool dugout builds which people seem to enjoy, but factor in where is your region. Does your climate get a lot of rain and precipitation? If that's the case, if you build a dugout, what are the chances that you're going to wake up one morning with 6 inches of water in your dugout? Because what happens when you dig a hole in the ground? It fills up with water. So before you start building a dugout shelter, understand when it comes winter, whether it's frozen ground, wet ground, that might not be the most applicable and reliant shelter to build, especially when you're exerting calories and effort into building something. So weather does affect. So with weather consideration, what is the ground and where you are at? If you're on top of a hill, rain's gonna run down. If you're building in a valley, water's gonna run down. You will be flooded. You will get wet despite what you build. Also having your fire, you do not want a fire pit getting flooded full of water. As well as knowing the trees and the vegetation around. What type of trees and plants do you have? What are around? What can be used? Do you know the difference between hardwood and softwood in order to build with? What works structurally, what doesn't? When it comes to burning a fire, how does hardwood and softwood both react in a fire? What's going to create more smoke? Do you want to be seen? Do you want to give away your location? You have to understand and learn all plants, all trees, your environment down to the T. It will aid you in ways most people can't comprehend. It goes back to survival with location. There's 2 types of scenario: a survival situation when you want to be found, and then there's a survival situation in which you don't want to be found. That's escape and evading. And escape and evading could mean your country's at war. Escape and evasion means in order to live off the land and to go undetected. How to build a shelter that cannot be seen and how not to give away your location. It is not something commonly talked about. But yeah, understanding your situation and what might be coming affects how you're going to plan for that situation, what type of gear you are going to carry. You can look at anybody's videos and say, oh, there's a bug out bag, there's a survival pack, I'm going to pack like just that guy. But if you're in a completely different region, in a completely different environment, with a completely different situation, that bag might not do absolutely jack for you. So you have to understand the common factors. So when it comes to building a shelter, you have to remember there's a few things you can do with wood. And that is, you have to be able to cut, you got to be able to split, be able to bore, put a hole into your pieces of wood, and notch. Having a chisel is very useful. Alrighty, some more useful knowledge to understand when in a survival situation, whether it's long-term or short-term, is food and water. You have to learn such skills as, do you know what animals are in your area and where you're going to? Do you know how to hunt? Do you know how to field dress? How to catch fish? Do you know how to procure those for long-term usage? How to purify water? That includes wild edibles, as well as using the trees and what you can find. Do you know what type of cambium in different trees can be eaten? Look at history, 1942, we all know what went on in Europe and Germany in those times. The people who got put into those camps, they survived off eating the cambium from the bark. They peeled the bark off the trees and ate the cambium layer because those people were starving. As well as what plants come, what is seasonal, what grows, okay? How to forage different types of mushrooms, as well as what can you use medicinally too. There's a lot around the forest provides for us. And what can we use that's antiseptic? How can we clean wounds? How can we mend our wounds? How can we make splints? How can we make arm slings if we get injured? There's much knowledge about what we have around us and what we can use to aid ourselves and better ourselves in any situation. The part to learn is fire. As most people think it's a common easy thing. Hey, I can light a fire, I got a match, I got a lighter, no biggie. Understanding when it's cold, when it's winter, and you can see -20, -30 on a winter's day, you're gonna wanna know what type of wood is gonna burn hot. I'm not gonna go spend my time harvesting a type of wood that's a softwood, which is gonna burn really quick, put off very little heat, and maybe smoke a whole bunch. So with that being said, utilize your resources, learn what's around you, what am I gonna use, what's gonna give me the most beneficial output from what I'm harvesting. If you're to build a shelter, you're gonna burn inside of it, build a nice little chimney. Do you understand carbon monoxide? How fire needs fresh air to burn. You don't want to seal yourself off, have a fire going, never wake up again. As well as we see fires, they're not just for heat. Fires are also meant for cooking. That means the way we burn, how we set up our pit, how we have our fire reflector. There are many advanced ways on how we can build off of this to maximize our proficiency in order to dry clothing, to cook off properly, how to dry wood at the same time you are burning. So that way you always have dry firewood to burn with and not just throwing on wet pieces constantly. So this brings us now to the top of our pyramid, which is kit, which is what most people think about and what they base it upon. So there are essential items in which you must have in order for a survival situation, such as a saw, an axe, you need a knife, you need cookware, cordage, there's a lot. Everybody knows the 5 C's, the 10 C's, expand on it. Though you must also focus on what nature can also provide to you. There's a lot of stuff we can carve, we can make, we can utilize using the resources around us, in which things we might not have to bring or pack to lighten our load to make it easier. That way, when we have periods of boredom in a survival situation, you have stuff to do, you have to be creative. So ultimately, a kit is just a bonus. It is very important, it is crucial to know how to improvise. If it's plastic, is it going to work in the cold weathers? What is your region? A lot of plastic becomes fragile and will break in cold temperatures. Make sure your gear does not have any cheap plastic. So with that being said about kit, in this video I'm not going to dive into it, I'm not going to pull out my bag. At the end of the day, the most important thing is that pyramid. You must have the will to live. You must have the knowledge. Upon that, you must have the right kit for where you are, what you need. How do you see these current events going? At the end of the day, history repeats itself. We all know what's came in the past and we all see what's happened. In today's society, our culture is extremely fragile. What we call survival now has been called the way of life for thousands of years. We are such accustomed to picking up a phone, ordering food and having it brought to us. Most people couldn't comprehend the survival situation because how soft and how easy of a life people have given themselves. But at the end of the day, unless you come out into the bush, unless you train, unless you master these skills, that was the only thing in which will benefit your survival outcome. Without practice, you don't get perfection. You know, I have been coming out for many years, beating on these skills, learning them, dialing them in. I have thrown away more gear than most people can comprehend because it either doesn't work, it's cheap, or it's wrong. All these guys preaching about silky saws, if you have one in your pack, toss it out the window. That is not a survival saw. Silkies are pretty much a hobby saw. Think about old-time loggers and pioneers and the saws those guys used to pack. Sure, they're a lot bigger and a bulkier of a saw, but you know what? They do not break, they do not snap. But you need tools that are basically going to outlive you. That goes for clothing too. Most clothing nowadays is not designed to be out in the woods, let alone the fibers, all this polyester nylon crap. You wear that around a fire. How many people have gone camping for a weekend and then you get a spark or an amber on you and now you got a gigantic hole in your polyester top or your $500 Arc'teryx drain jacket? Knowledge is understanding the gear, the clothing, the materials, the right footwear, how to dress for cold weather, how to dress for wet weather, the crucial importance of knowing how to layer your clothing. If you sweat and you freeze, you're gonna die. If you get wet and you stay wet, you're gonna get hypothermia and pneumonia. It is not a pretty situation. As well as those who have kids. A lot of these videos you guys see on YouTube, it's one person going out and they're surviving and thriving and it's all glamorous and wonderful. How many people watching this have kids at home and are aware of an incoming situation? How are you going to pack and how are you going to get kids and children ready? Do you have the means in order to build, to carry everything needed? Not just for yourself, but for children. Are you a family? So with all that being said and addressed, I hope it's not too much and not too overwhelming. At the end of the day, the best thing we can do is stay informed. Knowledge is the greatest tool. It always has been. Study the art of war. Know that whatever's coming, you cannot bank on electronics. For all those who dive into this Bitcoin nonsense, first sign of war is communications down. If we get hit by an EMP, very most likely your Bitcoin will be wiped from the face of the earth. There will be no trace. You have to have hard assets. You have to have the tools. You have to have the means. You have to have the gear. You have to have the knowledge. You have to have the tangible assets physically and mentally in order to sustain, in order to get through what can be thrown at us. So at the end of the day, we're all responsible for ourselves, and every man, you have a due diligence to your family in order to protect. At the end of the day, preparedness never hurt. It's better to have than have not. Cheers guys, here's to our rights to defend our loved ones, our religions, and our freedom of rights. So when it comes to understanding our tools and our kit, everything we bring has multiple uses. Whether it's just a knife, know how to use it. Even when it comes to kit, always have multiple knives. Because one is none and two is one in a sense. And we all have multiple functions. This one is not just for looking pretty. To have a knife, you must know how to use it. As well as for knowledge, is knowing how to defend yourself. How to use a knife in all shapes and forms to counter all scenarios. You're only as good as your training. So guys, at the end of the day, Mother Nature is ruthless. She'll only give you what you deserve. So study hard, ask questions, and the best thing about YouTube is this is a place where we can all be teachers and students. So if this video was a help, if you learned something, if you enjoyed it, feel free, please hit the like button. Or even better, subscribe. So if you guys found this video to be a help, or you would like me to expand on my next video about one of the topics I've talked about today, whether it's kit based, whether it's knowledge based, whether it's skill based, drop a comment in the comment section and I'll do it on my next video. I hope this video was useful. Hopefully you guys took something away about learning the pyramid of survival and how each tier affects the next. Because at the end of the day, we're only responsible for ourselves and our loved ones. So remember, prior planning prevents poor performance. So on that bombshell, guys, until the next one, this is BT Adventures signing out. Stay free, stay wild, get outdoors, practice, stay safe.